Good morning. My name's Frank Upchurch. I'm pastor of First Baptist Church of Crossroads. And the last 3 Sunday mornings, we have put a sermon online for people to listen to who are currently not going to church and have access to social media. We have not closed our church. We've had a sermon here every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. Not very great attendance, but whoever the Lord leads to come, that's who we'll try to minister to. I just thought we'd put some sermons online for people maybe that don't attend church, or maybe somebody that's just sheltering in home. The first sermon was on the bride of Christ. The second one was on the second coming. And the third one was, I've lost it. Right. Oh, 3 questions in Revelation. Why is there no more sea? Why are the leaves of the tree for the healing of the nation? And what are we going to inherit in eternity? So if you want to go back and listen to those 3, they're still online. I would like to have any comments anybody would like to send, or anything they'd like to talk about. My cell number is 903-681-3309. This morning, I'd like to talk to you about something that's gotten very popular in the last 3, 4, 5 months. Everybody seems to be using the phrase, use common sense. I found that common sense works in some things, but when God's leading you, common sense don't always work. Common sense can lead us in the wrong direction. I just want to share with you some things in the Bible that we see that people did in the Old Testament and the New Testament. A lot of it just by common sense. We find in the very beginning, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In Genesis 3:6, the Bible says, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat." Folks, Adam and Eve were put in a perfect environment, in a perfect place. They were given one command, not to eat of the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And, that's the only really rule they had to obey there in the garden. We find that Eve's common sense kind of took over there as they were in the garden. She looked at the fruit, looked at the tree. She saw that the tree was good for food. It was pleasant to the eyes. It was a tree to be desired to make one wise. So she took thereof and ate it. Made common sense. If it was good to eat, if it'd make you wise, if it was pleasant, why not eat of it? The only problem was that God had told them not to eat of the fruit, and in the day they'd eat thereof, they would surely die. Well, that very day that Adam and Eve partook of the fruit, they died a spiritual death. And every man that's been born into this world has died a spiritual death. Now, as we examine Eve's common sense, how good was it? And what did it lead her to? Folks, when it always makes sense to obey God's will. As we go on in the Old Testament, what about Noah and the boat? It come to a time when the world had gotten so evil that God was angry, and it come to a place where he is ready to destroy man. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and we find that God still has grace, and we're so thankful of God's grace. But God told Noah to build a boat, and it was in a place where it never rained. It was in a desert area, and this is what God told Noah, said, "And in this fashion which thou shalt make it of, The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. Now, when you look at that, that means that boat was over probably 400 feet long, a football field and a little more in length. And you look at the times they were living in and the tools they had to build with. They were living in an area where there might not have been very many trees, and they had to have gopher wood. And folks, my common sense would have told me, man, don't start this project. There's no way you can live long enough to finish it. With the limited labor, with the limited tools, and with the massive amount of work, if Noah had listened to his common sense, he said, there's no way this can be done. And after that, to gather all the animals and get them in the boat, and it was a seemingly impossible task. Noah didn't use his common sense, he used faith. He believed God. And folks, that's what say, what would have happened if Noah had used a little common sense, said, I just don't believe I can handle this. I don't believe it's too big a project. We wouldn't be here today, folks. God had buried the whole world in water. Well, we find after the flood, the world had been destroyed, and Noah and his family come back and replenish the earth. And in Genesis 11, 1 through 4, we find, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Folks, these people had a plan. The world had been destroyed by water. They were going to build a tower that reached to heaven. I felt like that God couldn't flood them out anymore. They used common sense. We're building a city for our future. We're going to take care of the future. How did their common sense work out? It ended up they couldn't talk to one another, and God scattered them, and they didn't seek God's will. Well, again, we find a man named Abraham, and Abraham was a man of faith, a man of great faith. In Genesis 12, 1 through 4, now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, into a land that I will show thee. Folks, right there is where my common sense would have kicked in. I love where I live. I'm sure Abram loved where he lived. Abram was a wealthy man. He wasn't a poor man. He didn't need any more. He didn't need anything. He had plenty. But God told him, he said, I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Well, this was a promise of God. But I'm sure there was a little conflict there, because every time I ever moved in life, there was some conflict. There was some questions. Am I getting into a better situation or a worse situation? God said, And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Abraham departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Folks, I'm the same age that Abram was when he left Haran, and I've got no desire to move anywhere from Crossroads, Texas. I plan to, my next move, I pray, will be to Post Oak Cemetery. So Abram laid aside everything he had and took the journey that God had for him. Folks, that's what we need to do, is find God's will and take the journey that God has for us. Now, we find again that Abram was a man of faith in Genesis 15, 1 through 6. It said, After these things the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield, and thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. He said unto him, So shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord and counted it to him for righteousness. So Abram had faith, and Abram believed that God was going to take care of giving him a child. But then Abram's common sense kicked in, along with Sarah's. In Genesis 16, 1 through 4, now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an husbandman, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. I can't do it. My common sense says that Abram can have a child by my handmaid. And Abram went along with it. And now he has a servant who's with child. And Abram took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Now, folks, how did their common sense work out? A child was born to Hagar. His name was Ishmael. He has been a thorn in the flesh. The descendants of Ishmael have been a thorn in the flesh of Israel from that time on. Common sense didn't work out. But later in Genesis 22, 1 through 5, after a child was born, Isaac was born to Sarai, the child of promise. God told Abraham in Genesis 22, he said, And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here am I. And he said, Take now listen to this scripture, folks, take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee unto the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. Now, folks, how would your common sense work out here? God says, Abraham, take this child that I promised you, that I gave you, and carry him to Mount Moriah, in the land of Moriah, and offer him as a sacrifice. Folks, my common sense would have stopped me right there. It would have stopped me dead in my tracks right there. But faith carried Abraham on. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. Folks, Abraham was serious about following God's instructions. Now, he took Isaac, he took the wood, he took the fire, he took the knife, he took everything and went to offer him as a sacrifice. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young son, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad. And his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again unto you. So Abraham, we know the rest of the story. Abraham went up on the mountain and prepared the altar, and was prepared to take Isaac's life and offer him as a sacrifice when God showed him the ram hung in the bushes there, and he sacrificed the ram. Perfect picture of the sacrifice, the Son of God, that would one day be offered as a sacrifice for mine and your sins. Folks, many times Israel had to step out of their comfort zone, and their taking their things into their own hands and using their common sense. When they got to the promised land, in Joshua 6, 1 through 5, it came to the city of Jericho, which was a fortress, had huge walls, and it was just about impenetrable with the types of weapons that men used in that day. So we find them at Jericho. Now, Jericho was straightly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given unto thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. And ye shall compass the city, and ye men of war, and go around about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. Now, you mean we're just going to gather together and the men of war and walk around this place 6 days? And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. Now, folks, what kind of common sense does that make? Here's a city with massive walls, a fortified place, and you're going to march around it and blow a trumpet? Man, that don't sound very sensible. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up, every man straight before him. Now, folks, if you use common sense, if you lived in the Old Testament in the days of early days of Israel, and you used common sense, how would that have worked out? No way would you think that could bring victory. But what happened? The walls fell down. Everybody was destroyed, but Rahab the harlot kept the 2 spies. Folks, God works in mysterious ways, but he doesn't work by my common sense. God, what about Gideon and his common sense? We find in Judges, the 7th chapter, 1 through 6, Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him, rose up early and pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites unto their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, Mine own hand has saved me. Now here Gideon had gathered up everybody he could gather to go against the Midianites. And God tells him, you got too many. You got too many. And so then in verse 3, Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned to the people 20 and 2,000, and there remained 10,000. Well, he started out with 32,000, and 22 of them just went home. Now, if you were using your common sense, you're thinking, well, their army's not decreasing, and mine just decreased by 22,000. What kind of chance have I got now? Well, and the Lord said unto Gideon, The people that are yet too many, bring them down into the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, This shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, This shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So God's going to look at them again. And so he brought down the people into the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, Every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise every one that boweth upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. Folks, Gideon ended up with 300 men. 300 men. When he started out with 32,000. Common sense would tell you, Gideon, forget about it. Forget about it. God would tell you, Gideon, the battle is mine. Go. And that's what Gideon did. And we know what happened. What about David's common sense when he was going into battle and he wanted to number his warriors, number Israel? His best general told him, don't do this, David, don't do this. He went ahead and numbered his people. Well, that makes common sense. If you're going to fight a war, you need to know how many men you got on your side. You need to know about the enemy you're facing. But this angered God. God had already told him he'd give him the victory. Well, when David numbered the men, come up with 3 choices, and he chose to have pestilence for 3 days. David lost 70,000 men the first day. The first day died. David's common sense didn't work out very well. Now, many challenges David took totally and strictly by faith. Every one he took worked out. Folks, we're not. What about Daniel's common sense when he went to the window and prayed facing Israel? When there had been a decree set out by the king, it said anybody that prayed to any other god but him would be thrown in the lion's den. Daniel's common sense should have told him, Daniel, go shut your window. Go shut your window. They've set a trap for you. You can keep praying, but keep your window closed. Daniel left his window open and prayed just as he did every day, 3 times a day. What happened? Ended up in the lion's den, didn't he? But what happened in the lion's den? He was delivered. God delivered him. What about the 3 Hebrew children that were told to bow down in front of this massive statue that the king had built? They refused to bow down. When their common sense had told him, just bow down. You can pray to whoever you want to. Just don't stand out in this crowd. Bow down and get out of his sight. He won't even know who you're praying to. Not them. Folks, their faith said, stand and call upon your God. And they did. And what did God do? He delivered them from the lion's den. And folks, in the New Testament, we find people use faith instead of common sense. Some of them use common sense too. People try to use common sense for salvation today, like, well, if I'm good enough, I'll get to heaven. Folks, that won't work. It won't work. If your faith is strong enough and you believe totally and completely in God is the Lord of your life, you'll get to heaven, but not by works. What about Peter? When we saw Peter's common sense step in a lot of times when he did things that God didn't lead him to do. But what about Peter when he got out of the boat, walked on the water? Do you think his common sense was leading him there? I don't think so. Peter had been a fisherman too long to know, to believe that he could walk on water. But folks, his faith took hold, and Peter walked on water. When did he sink? When his common sense took hold. There were storms about, the water was rough, and he was standing on it, and he began to sink. And what happened? Jesus reached out and took him. But folks, the common sense I'm worried about, I know beyond any shadow of a doubt that we're living in the latter days. There's just too many things happening, and there are too many signs and biblical prophecies being fulfilled to think that we're in anything but the latter days. But folks, in the latter days, in the last 7 years, people are going to be called on to use their common sense. There's going to be a man ruling over the world, to be a one world government. And folks, that's a push today to get a one world government, have one world peace, do what the government says do. The government, one day, there'll be a leader that says you have to have a mark in your hand to buy, or in your hand or forehead to buy or sell or participate in the economy. Folks, what's your common sense going to say? You can't buy food, you can't trade, you can't do anything without this mark. What's your common sense going to say? It's going to say, better take it, better take it. This probably not what the Bible's talking about anyway. Folks, I want to tell you what, there's only one way to live, and that's by faith. That's by faith. It's all right to use common sense when you start to walk across the road unless God told you to cross. You don't want to walk out in front of a car. Common sense tells you don't take chances. But folks, faith will tell you to obey God in every case. If God's leading you, obey Him. It may not make sense. It might not make sense to give a friend that's really suffering your last dollar. But if God told you to, it's best to do it because God will take care of you. God said He'd supply all of our needs according to His riches and glory. One of the great problems we have in Christianity today is people using their common sense rather than their faith. People taking care of themselves rather than their brother. Folks, I want you to examine, look through the Bible and see how many places you can find where common sense would work better than faith. Folks, it's good to be with you this morning. I plan maybe in the next few Sundays to keep putting a little message on social media just for people that might listen that don't come to church. I just want to tell you, anybody that's listening is welcome to come visit us at First Baptist Church of Crossroads. I don't tell anybody where they ought to go to church. I just tell you, you better be obedient to God. Wherever God leads you, you better go. Y'all have a good day, and thank you for being with us. And